Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to 3C Amplified. I'm your host, Jacqueline Destremps, here to highlight the businesses, nonprofits, and individuals collaborating to amplify their impact in the community. This series is sponsored by Another Hand Advantage, where I create marketing strategies for community-minded small businesses and nonprofits that fit your schedule and budget while making your brand stand out in front of your audience. Joining me in the studio today is Candice Liozu Biondo. Yay! She gave me the thumbs up. Program Director for Foster360, and Robert Rhoton, CEO of Arizona Trauma Institute and Therapy, and President at the Trauma Institute International. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much
for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for being in today. So we were actually just talking before we went on air. I was introduced, Candice, to you from a guest I had on previously. He said, you have to have Candice on to talk about Foster360. And I said, you know, foster care and the issues surrounding it are very near and dear to me. I actually worked for a foster care agency for about 5 years before I struck out on my own and opening my own marketing agency. But, you know, I actually feel a little out of the loop. So it'll almost be as if I'm starting anew today when we're talking about foster care. And, you know, and specifically today, we'll actually be talking about some of the older children in foster care who actually end up aging out. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Why don't we get started? Robert, how about a little introduction from yourself and how you got into working in the field of trauma?
Well, mental health really is the field of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe the research out there, you realize that about 90% of anybody that comes in for any kind of mental health treatment has a trauma history. And so I kind of came into it backwards. It wasn't something I intended. I just wanted to be really good at what I did, and that just led me into the field of trauma. And then as I began to understand how it should work, I became kind of frustrated that not only were people not being trained this way, but that the systems are set up to reinforce trauma rather than relieve it. So that's been kind of my mission, goal, passion for the last 22, 23 years.
Okay. And Candice, let's hear from you a little bit about Foster360, but I'd love to actually hear a little bit. Just before I came in today, I was putting together my show notes and I was reading through some of your biography, I guess, and I learned that you actually came from corporate America. So how did that?
Yes.
How did you land? How did that happen? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, you're right. I spent all of my career in the corporate private sector, and not just in corporate America, but also corporate Europe, because that's where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was after spending 20 years in the field, I really had a moment in my life where I started questioning things and started questioning specifically my why I was doing what I was doing, and yearning for purpose. And I always had, there was always a special place in my heart for youth at risk. I grew up in the projects and I was surrounded by, adversity, but somehow I made it. Somehow I got myself out of it, and I attribute it to my parents moving us out of the projects at an age where I was still able to, look at things from a different perspective, but also amazing mentors, amazing people in my life. And so, yes, that's how it happened. And about 3 years ago, that is when I moved from Pittsburgh and left everything behind and started fresh. And I literally ran into Mark Young, the CEO of Mesa United Way, talked to him about my idea of how I thought we could help youth at risk, and he then educated me on the issue facing youth aging out of foster care here in Arizona. The statistics are alarming. 900 youth age out every year in Arizona alone, and half of them end up homeless by the age of 20. Mainly because, their plan is to couch surf or to live with the boyfriend's parents, and those are plans that sound great in the moment, but they're not sustainable. We have a huge issue with sex trafficking, touching our youth that are homeless. And when I heard that, I knew that was what I wanted to do. So Foster360 was born in April of 2018, and it's been an amazing journey ever since. Dr. Rhoton is one of the first people I met when I started just designing this program at a high level. And within an hour of hearing him, I understood that was the missing link. One of the missing links, but the big one, of understanding what I call, and I hope Dr. Rhoton, I don't, I have my own words to translate, the science, but I call it the anatomy of trauma, meaning the physiological aspect of trauma and the importance of anybody working with a vulnerable population to truly understand what that means and understand the kind of impact that we can have in helping those individuals really go past those challenges around trauma.
Right. So on that note then, when you were doing your introduction, you were talking about how you kind of went into this backwards as far as getting into the field of trauma. You had said that you were noticing that a lot of what people thought was in place to help with trauma, help someone overcome that, was not the case. And so when it comes to foster youth and maybe that first meeting then that you had with Candice, what was it that struck you about, I guess, Candice's ideas for this? At the time, I'm sure you didn't know it was going to be Foster360, but what that program was going to look like and how you could, coming with that background, could really help in that sense.
Well, when I first met Candice, she had a bunch of loose ideas she hadn't put together yet. Mm-hmm. And I was basically saying, well, you have to take this into consideration. There's just some realities of having children in the foster care system. Number one, that they are in constant states of distress. They're removed from a very stressful environment. They're put into a new environment. And from the state's perspective, it is are they physically safe? And we aren't asking or examining, do they feel safe? Are they emotionally, psychologically safe? Is their body in a state of arousal? Because as long as their body is experiencing that, as long as they don't feel safe, then they're not going to learn well, which is a tremendous problem we have with foster kids. They're not going to be able to prosper. One of the simple little pieces that emerges in children that have histories of adversity, toxic stress, and trauma is they are so caught up in that reactive mode that they rarely have access to their executive functioning, which means they're not going to be really prepared to be adults on their own and be able to plan and follow through and problem solve. Another piece of that is that one of the real challenges for children that have a pervasive history of this is they cannot prioritize. It's not that they don't want to, but the part of their brain that allows them to do that has really spent most of their developmental life offline. And so we often expect, well, can't they see this as just logical? Well, no, the answer is they can't because they don't prioritize. They're used to being reactive to every moment rather than planful. So having any program, I don't care how well it's developed, if it doesn't take those things into consideration, what we're actually doing is putting an additional expectation on a child that doesn't have the fundamental skills to actually operate. Mm-hmm. And the other piece of this is you have to have a child, in order for them to really be able to get that and internalize it, they need at least one secure attachment, one safe person in their life. And we don't do that very well. A lot of people that are in the foster care system are there really kind of meet some need of their own and often less optimal reasons. But they put a lot of demands on these kids. You come into my home, you behave the way I want you to behave. I don't care what your history is. Their idea is, I've been successful with my 8 children. I know what to do. No, you don't know what to do because this child isn't like your children. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of demand put on these kids that set them up to fail. And so what I liked about what I was hearing from Candice was we need to really address the broad range in order to prepare these children to be successful adults. And I don't see that in any of the systems.
Mm-hmm. So what does that look like then, Candice? Is when you started building out Foster360 after hearing that and having that conversation, how did that help you then develop? Did it give you a more solid plan then of where you wanted to go and how you wanted to move forward?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So it has a few components, obviously. One of them is, so my team is composed of navigators. Okay. What we do is we help the youth aging out of foster care connect with the community. What we find, when you look at the statistics, half of the kids aging out of foster care end up homeless, but yet look out there how many organizations there are that serve this population. At some point, you need to ask yourself, okay, how come? Right? Mm-hmm. And what I found, that's the consultant in me speaking, by really talking to people, I understood that the problem was the coordination of the services. Right? There's no coordination or very little. And sometimes it's happening by chance. So our navigators are there to connect the youth to the community and make sure that through the connections that we make and, helping them, being a support person, as Dr. Rhoton was stating, being that one person that they can count on, being that one person that's going to advocate for them, mm-hmm. right, along the way. The big difference, the big shift that my conversation with Dr. Rhoton created was, I cannot be in a hurry to create impact. So my numbers may not look as awesome and amazing as some other organizations, but we take into account the fact that sometimes some of the youth we work with, they are just not in a place where they can self-reflect, where they can prioritize, and all we can do is be there for them. Mm-hmm. And we look at things as baby steps. And sometimes it might look like a contradiction, but we're very clear internally on how we do this. With the youth, we are never in a hurry. Internally, I always challenge the team to think ahead, mm-hmm. right? We are never dictating our clients what to do with their lives and how to do it, but we think ahead in what organizations and what resources could we, introduce them to so that they can start developing a vision.
Right.
Okay. So that's one thing. So the idea is the rush. Now, there is a rush when we end up having a referral for a homeless youth, right? So the rush we have is to, a lot of our money is spent in motel rooms, because when I hear of a youth that is homeless, immediately I want to put them in a motel room because I know the risks of, falling into the trap of sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to avoid at all costs. But other than that, when it comes to the work that we do, we look at where the client is. We try to evaluate what is the best timing, and we meet them where they are. And that was directly influenced by my conversation with Dr. Rhoton. Mm-hmm. And the second aspect of it is internally for us. Here's the thing. What I found is a lot of organizations will say that they are trauma-informed. Trauma-informed care is not about attending a training and checking a box off, like I used to do for project management.
Right.
That is not how it goes.
Right.
What you need to do is you go to the training and then you take the learning and you apply them to yourself first. And that's the hard part. People don't always want to look at themselves in the mirror. And guess what? That's what trauma-informed care is going to have you do. Mm-hmm. It's going to make you look at yourself in the mirror, take that deep look, mm-hmm. And start showing you where things are not working for yourself, right? So it's all about self-regulation. It's all about having the ability to model it for youth. So what we did internally is we have a peer support system. So our team knows anything that is heavy, that feels like unresolved inside of you, we need to bring it up with the team, and we help each other. And the second thing is we continuously learn. So we have attended quite a few of Dr. Rhoton's trainings, but we also purchased the book that he co-authored, and we have a book study happening every Friday morning. And what we do is we read a chapter, and then we talk about how it applies to our youth. Because the thing is, it's a constant reminder. When you work so hard on behalf of a youth, and you give them on a golden plate an opportunity to go for a job interview, and then they don't show.
They don't go,
Let me tell you, you can read all the books you want on self-regulation. You're going to get triggered. You're going to start taking things personally. And what we understand is that we need to do the work on ourselves and then be able to show it and model it to the youth that we work with. Foster360 is not there to check boxes off. We want to create sustainable impact. So helping them find a job, helping them find housing is great. And obviously that's what we do. But what I want to see coming out of this program is that we created a pathway for these individuals to create a fulfilling and productive life. They have the right to go to college if that is their desire. They have the right to find an amazing job that fulfills them. They are not doomed. And, whatever history they went through doesn't have to perpetuate for the rest of their lives.
Right. And Dr. Rhoton, specifically with, I guess, since we are talking about the foster youth that are aging out of the system. So it could be that they came into the system at 3 and they're leaving at 18. It could be that they came into the system at 15 and they're leaving at 18. What specifically around that, that time, that, 17, 18-year-old time, the trauma that they had experienced before, why is this so significant, I guess, then on maybe this age group specifically, and what Candice and her colleagues are dealing with through Foster360?
Part of it is understanding what is normal to expect. And the way our systems are set up really doesn't work with the physiology and the neurophysiology that we know of. In other words, most systems are not set up to align with what we know scientifically as possible. So let's talk about a child that's being raised in an optimal environment that isn't exposed to trauma and toxic stress and adversity. They should be able to be self-reflective and be able to regulate themselves the majority of the time, sometime between the age of 11 and 13, without having an adult present. Children that are younger than that, it's even inappropriate to expect that of them. Yet we have system after system that is designed and doesn't take that into account. So it's basically the systems have been built to ignore what is biologically appropriate for human beings. Then when you add stress, toxic stress, adversity, trauma to the mix, you actually push that window back. And so what you need a child to be able to do in order to plan, to follow through, to be able to be self-reflective and evaluate their own behavior, they have to be able to access that part of their brain and nervous system. But if their environment has been, repeatedly churned up so they don't have access to that, we can hit somebody that's in their early 20s and hasn't gotten to that place yet. And a lot of what we're doing in individual therapy, once we understand the physiology piece, is actually giving them experiences where they can regulate themselves. Often because of their history, that feels odd to them. Mm-hmm. And so they have to be able to experience it in order to recreate it. Where a child that's living in an optimal environment, they learn that through the coordinated interaction with stable parents or stable caregivers. But you put a kid in foster system, they know the chances are pretty good, particularly if they're, say, anybody above 8 or 9, they know it's pretty good that this is a temporary measure. So even though they're physically safe, they rarely feel emotionally or psychologically safe. And if they are having troubles regulating themselves very well, then people are going to get irritated with them, and you're going to see this child go through multiple placements or in a group home. And their entire lives, all of their developmental process has been hijacked by these high levels of arousal. And the very skills they absolutely need to be responsible, self-governing adults has not been developed at a biological level. And then we put a lot of demand on them. We say, you should be able to do this. Well, yes. But the failure is really a multiple layered failure. It's a failure of their own parents to be well regulated enough to create that safety for them. It's a failure of the system itself to create or to recruit and train foster parents that know how to deal with this and are doing it in a way that engages children rather than bringing them in and expecting them to perform like their children did. The education system needs to adapt to having these children in their system, and they hate that. They just want them to be compliant and acquiescent. And the more you put pressure on for acquiescence and compliance, the less able they are to regulate.
Yeah.
So, it's just a failure overall in the systems to recognize that you cannot ask somebody to operate outside their way their biology and nervous system is designed to work and be successful.
So I guess a lot of it, I think, comes down to just not even understanding. You referred to, well, my kids are like this, so I know how to deal with an 8-year-old that does X, Y, Z, so I should be able to foster an 8-year-old. And wait a minute, why are they not acting like this? I guess a lot of that maybe even goes to not even realizing, because it just happens so organically when you're in that, when you're in that space of, not having gone through any of that trauma.
Sure.
So a lot of that, I guess that education then is probably on both sides of things when it comes to, families who do want to foster, the education of this is why it's not going to be that way. It physically can't be that way. It's not just because, the kid's been through some trauma, so he's going to act out. It's physically in their brain that they can't regulate the way that your own children can. And that's why that's that way.
Well, and not only that, but you're dealing with most of the really excellent parenting programs that are available to any parent are really based loosely on Adlerian principles, which is using a secure attachment as a mechanism to create desire to follow and be like the parent. But when you pull a kid out of a troubled environment and you put them in this foster care system and they don't have what we train them is on this, which is how to parent a child you have an attachment to. But you don't have an attachment to this child, so how do you parent them?
Right.
And we don't prepare them. And I've had this conversation in multiple states with different child protective services, and the answer I get over and over again is, if we really told them what to expect, we couldn't get foster parents to do it. I think that is incredibly undervaluing the people that have a heart for this. And we wouldn't have as many disruptions if we actually did a better job of prepping them to know what they were going to deal with.
Right.
And to help them understand, you're going to have to change what you do. You absolutely can't do what you know and what you're familiar with this child.
One of the other things I ran into also, so when I worked for a foster care agency, my job was marketing and recruitment. So I was that gatekeeper. The people called me up initially and said, I want to be a foster parent. And everybody wanted a baby or a toddler, because I guess they thought, what damage could be done there? This will be so much easier. But then another thing I ran into is a lot of people thinking that with the older children, the reason they were in foster care is because of something that they did. And so it was this huge stereotype of overcoming and trying to explain to them, things will be a little bit different with an older child or a teen in foster care, but they're not here because of something they did. It's still it's something that somebody else did, and that's why they're here. And so, again, going back to you saying, if we told them if we told them this, they wouldn't want to do it. I think I did try to be very realistic with families, especially once I started going and seeing what was really happening in the homes and trying to tell people, especially those who called up, and one of the very first questions I asked them was, so why do you want to be a foster parent? Oh, well, we raised 6 kids and we did such a great job and they're moving on in their life and this is our way of giving back, and trying to explain to them, okay, well, it's not exactly going to be that way. They're not, they haven't been with you since day one. It's going to be a little bit different.
And I'd like to add something. Personally, I believe that yes, we need to take into account the trauma and the effects that it has, but they're not condemned.
Right.
There is a way for them to succeed in life. And yes, it's going to be difficult at the beginning. What I think is that we live in a society that needs immediate satisfaction, right? So we need, you look at the videos of, you go and you find a little puppy abandoned, and then you show the video of the progression, and 2 months later the puppy gets adopted and everybody's happy. That is not how it works in the foster care world, or talk about any vulnerable population. You need to just take the time and the education to help in a way that will allow them to progress and flourish and prosper. But my driver is because I believe that the youth that we are serving are the leaders of tomorrow. Maybe not all of them, but why not giving them equal opportunity and give them the opportunity to choose that pathway? And I feel like the way we are structured, and that goes back to what Dr. Rhoton said, we have all these expectations. You turned 18, listen, you need to find a job. And, when I go to a speaking engagement, I do the same exercise all the time. I ask people, by raise of hand, show me who has kids. And most of the time, everybody raises their hand. And then I said, okay, well, imagine your child is turning 17 and a half, or is 17 and a half, and you sit them down at the kitchen table and you tell them, listen, this has been such a great journey. I loved being with you for the past 17 and a half years. But listen, you're going to turn 18 in 6 months. I'm ready to move on. Thank you. Here is a list of resources. They may be a little outdated. Some phone numbers might be wrong. Turnover is terrible in this field, but go for it and look for a job, go to college, and find an apartment. And good luck. This has been great. Thank you so much. And then everybody laughs. And then I ask, by raise of hand, tell me if your child who you raised with all the love you could would be successful. And nobody raises their hand, right? So you take my child, he will not be capable of doing this at the age of 18. But we are expecting these kids who went through hell and back, who experienced all this trauma, who didn't have the modeling that we all take for granted with our own children, okay, to create these skills, to experience these skills, and then we're expecting them to just make it work. And that makes me very angry. But there is something for them. We just need to approach it the right way. And to Dr. Rhoton's point, we're not always doing so.
Right. There needs to be that bridge with anything.
And time.
You can't just hand over a packet of resources and then say, well, my job is done here. Good luck. There needs to be something more involved in that. And that's, again, like you were saying, that's where your navigators come into play with really helping to connect them with those resources. They say, like you said, you set them up with that great job interview and you're so excited to wait and hear how it went. And then they say, oh, I didn't go. Being able to say, okay, well, let's work on that. Why did that happen? And what can we do to help you?
And we don't even ask why, because most of the time, from what we learn, is that self-reflection, we just understand that they're not at that state, right? Where it really hurts us as a society is that sometimes, or very often, unfortunately, we have to do things in the wrong order. When I have a homeless youth and I want to sign him up for a program, but this program will only house them if they found a job, I have to ignore the fact that they don't have the capability of prioritizing and have self-reflection. I need to push them to find a job so they can go on in this program, right? So that is what needs to change at a very fundamental level, is to do things in the right order. And ideally, we need to be able to bring them in and not expect anything from them other than just showing them and providing them with experiences on how to bring all of this toxic stress down. And that's where I'm completely butchering the scientific terms here, but bring that whole toxic stress down and get them back to that threshold where they are able to function at a physiological level. And then we can do something about it. And I will give you an example. We partner with Thrive AZ, who has transition housing. And they provide a really safe environment for these kids. Unfortunately, they don't have enough houses. I would really like them to grow. But the kids are loved there. And, we have this partnership with them by which, we pay for the first 2 months of the program fee so the youth don't have to think about or worry about anything. And within 2 months, we go to them and we sit down when we develop a plan, and the conversations are completely different from the youth that we are meeting at Starbucks and who is sleeping on the benches. So we have evidence that this is working. If you combine navigation with a safe place to stay, you can actually create amazing results. But it all takes time, and people don't always like to wait. They want results right away.
Yeah. So even outside of the just this population, where else is the trauma-informed care and this learning, I guess, this process that people are going through? Where else are you seeing that being important or beneficial?
Well, you have a real push by SAMHSA to move everybody in the trauma-informed arena. You have Almost everybody recognizes the need for moving away from a pathology mindset into a wellness mindset. It is that the systems are now so self-sustaining, and they're operating in ways that are really not, a lot of them are 35, 40 years behind the science of what's out there. And they're doing what they're familiar with. And the moment you start talking about change, you dysregulate the people that manage these systems. And then instead of changing, they become even more rigid and not changing. Mm-hmm. So it's a thought process difference. You see in other areas outside of mental health, you see this as an initiative in what we call compassionate management. LinkedIn and several large companies have started an initiative in the last year to try to encourage companies to include and educators to include in their MBA systems, training business people to operate from what we would consider a trauma-informed perspective, but they're calling it a compassionate management style. Because we realize that if you don't create an environment where the people that work there can be regulated and make intentional choices and follow through well, then you underserve whatever population you're working with, whether that's a manufacturing company or whether that's a mental health company. We have system after system that is not designed with the way human beings actually operate. And the system wants the human being to operate like the system wants them to, and they can't. Mm-hmm. And what we end up doing is finding these systems that then become incredibly critical of the person that can't. If I'm a child and I am having tremendous stress on a daily basis, it doesn't even require any kind of traumatic experience like sexual or physical or emotional abuse. Just I'm living in a daily stressful environment. My body is so churned up that I can't do a lot of the basic functions that would help me be successful in school. So does the school ask the teachers and the system to adapt so that they can really engage and be relevant to these children? No, they use punitive and punishing methods to try to get them to change. And a lot of the technology that was developed for classroom management really occurred in the Eisenhower era. It doesn't fit the kids we have in system after system a day. So we grossly underserve them. A little simple example of just the physiology. The moment the excitatory system kicks in and your heart rate speeds up and your breathing changes, there's a change. It's a small change, but it's a huge impact. And people need to understand that the muscles of the middle ear constrict. And when they constrict, a child cannot process sound the way that they should. In other words, they cannot hear what you're saying. And if you want them to hear you, you have to drop your voice significantly and really slow your speech down. Well, we know that's biologically true. You cannot like it all you want, but you cannot fight the biology. Yeah. It's like saying, I don't mind you taking a bite of this apple, but you better not produce any stomach acid because we don't like stomach acid. That's foolish. Yeah. And we have an education system that is foolish because it doesn't design what it does to fit the child. We have a foolish, in many ways, the way we deal with the juvenile justice system. We get kids in and we treat treatment as a punishment for them, a hoop to jump through, rather than something that is really designed to help stabilize them and improve the quality of their life. And we wonder, why aren't we getting a better bang for all the bucks we spend for that? Mm-hmm. So I can pretty much go through every system that deals with human beings and show you how it's shortfall, right, because it's so far off of what we know what actual human beings need to prosper.
And, just to add to what Dr. Rhoton was saying, I am an executive coach. And I have just a couple of clients that I still work with. And one of them gets triggered in meetings and, has the exact same symptoms, if I may call them that way, than our kids. It's just triggers. And I taught him a technique from the book, a relaxation technique that you don't need to plan, because that is one of the things that we learn is what can we do when we are in the moment? Because meditation is great, but you can't just stop a meeting and say, let me go meditate for 5 minutes.
Let me get my Headspace app
right?
on, everybody. Hold on one moment.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So they're teaching some very simple techniques of relaxation that allow us as the caregivers to model self-regulation in the moment, right? Well, guess what? I mean, coming from the corporate world, how many triggers are there in that environment? And you go in a meeting and you get talked to, about your targets and how many sales, and then you get triggered. Those are techniques you can use to self-regulate and calm yourself down. And I keep telling Dr. Rhoton that, and I said, what is the name, doctor, of the gentleman? I forgot his name. He has a big institute. I think it's in Texas.
Bruce Perry?
Bruce Perry. I ran into him at a conference and I said, why are we calling this trauma-informed care? It's applicable to everybody.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Everybody that experiences triggers, and everybody experiences triggers, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with the youth event that you're working with, Candice, what does that process look like? How are they coming to you? Are you, are you reaching out to them, or are they being referred to you by someone specifically? How does that process work? And then I guess just tell me a little bit about, what that looks like as they come into your program.
So at the beginning, we did a lot of outreach, and now we don't need to do it anymore. So we get a lot of referrals. We are, sadly, I always said I would never do that, but we are on a wait list now. Mm-hmm. The way they get engaged with us is we have what we call an intake, and all it is, it's basically just sitting down and talking to them. And we just gather some minimal information that we need about them. And then we just hear them out, and we understand where they are and what their goals are, what their wishes are. And there is no bad wish. There is no, rapping is not going to take you anywhere. If you want to become a rapper, then we take note of the fact that you want to become a rapper, okay? We may ask them some questions, very simple questions about, their situation. What we want to identify is, are their primary needs met, and are they in any type of danger? Some of our youth live in group homes. Some of our youth live in what we call independent living. So they are either part of a program, or they just live in an apartment on their own. And very often in those cases, they're on the verge of being evicted, which is why we get the referral. Mm-hmm. And then we devise a plan. And that is where sometimes it can get tricky, because we know that you don't talk about the plan right away. But we have to do that in some cases, in a lot of the cases actually. But we do it in a gentle way. We offer solutions. We tell them, we do a lot of education on what is coming up. We talk to them about how we are going to be helping them, what is going to happen, and we keep them up to date along the way. Advocacy goes a long way. So representing them in a meeting really creates opportunities for them to see, here I have a person that really stood up for me. And we find that we have shifts at that point with the youth. So I always tell my team, the first 3 months, don't think I'm going to come to you and demand an impact. Just build a relationship. Do small things. We found the other day, one of our navigators connected one of our youth to piano lessons. Is that the gist of what we do? No, right? But that creates the rapport that we need to then be able to work on more strategic goals. Mm-hmm. We work with youth age 14 to 24, but the majority of the youth we have are 17 to 22. All of them have something going on, that needs to be resolved. We stay with them for 2 years. I don't foresee there to be a complete break after 2 years, but more touch points, making sure that they're okay. We are almost 2 years old now. We opened our program in April, but I didn't start seeing clients until November because we really wanted to make sure that we had a model. I mean, to Dr. Rhoton's point, I came in with loose ideas at first, right? So it's been 1.5 years since we started seeing clients. Some of them are, we've been with them for 1.5 years. And what we find is some of them are in a good place now, but we need to continue being in touch, even if it means a phone call every month. How are things going? How are you doing? And they have questions, very simple questions, but they just need that help. They just need that one person that could be a mom and a dad. Mm-hmm. And we don't identify as mom and dad, right? But I could see my child asking me these questions when he's 20, right?
Right.
But that's all they need. And we are still there for them to do that. So that is what it looks like. And we go with the flow. So we have the setbacks. We have the success stories that we celebrate. Then we have another setback, and then we have another success story. We see that by doing baby steps and by really not giving up on them, we really create wonderful relationships. And sometimes we work more than the youth. And if that's the case, it has happened that some youth ended up not working with our program anymore. You cannot force transformation. You just can't do it. But what we hope is we planted a seed. And we have had youth that went back to us 6 months later and said, well, I'm kind of ready now.
Yeah.
And we never remove someone from our database. They're just in a status that tells us that we're not really working with them right now, but we always take them back if they come back.
Yeah. So Dr. Rhoton, tell me a little bit then about what it is that you're doing at the Arizona Trauma Institute.
Gosh, I wish that was easy to say in one sentence.
It can be 2 sentences.
We started out with the idea that we really just wanted to provide better understanding of trauma and how to treat it for mental health professionals. And that's where we started. And then just because there was a huge need, we found that we've worked with parents, and we work with schools, and we work with governments, and we work with a lot of corporations. So we do a lot of work with organizations that want to go in this direction for their own staff, and we're currently working with several companies, doing that with them. So it is the original intent was just to provide a really high quality clinical training for folks, and now we are kind of in lots of different avenues.
Yeah.
So we've worked with military folks. We've worked with schools in several states, including some. We worked a little bit with the Catholic diocese schools in Chicago. We've been East St. Louis schools. We've been in Albuquerque schools. We've done a lot of work here locally with schools that want to make this part of their thought process. So what we found is that as we could educate people, but the other piece that we're really involved is in system change. So we take a lot of opportunities to participate at different levels in state government and talk whenever we're invited to do so. Sometimes when we're not, because the systems have to change,
right?
And I really am unhappy that we don't change because of what's good for people. We change usually as a result of somebody going through some kind of class action that forces a system to change, rather than embracing change as part of the natural process of how do we continue to be human. And then we have these really unclear and pervasive expectations, particularly on youth. We expect them to pick a career and go after it with some gusto, and they're 17. And most of when I actually kind of play with folks around this, I said, so how many career changes did you make before you got to where you are now? And most of them made several. So would you have been okay being locked into the decision you made as a 17-year-old? And they all say, well, no. But why would we expect them to do that? Mm-hmm. The other piece is for these children that have this kind of stressful history, they absolutely need a safe relationship. One of the things I really like about what Candice is doing is these folks are building a safe relationship with these kids. It's there for them. And these people, I've talked to a good number of them. They really are sincere about wanting to do this. They want that relationship with these kids. Because it's just not, you can't help create change without it. It can't be a mechanistic process like a factory. They do this and do this and do this, and now we're done with them. It has to be a relationship. And then we also forget human beings are just human beings. How many times have each of us hesitated to start something because we were unsure of how it was going to come out, or we're worried about how we would look or how it would. And yet if this 17 or 18-year-old does that, then we're saying, well, they're not serious about this because they are not living up to what we expect. And when they don't live up to what we expect, we get incredibly critical and judgmental. And so all of that has to change in the way we operate human systems.
So as we wrap up here, Candice, I want to have you, for people who are listening to this and they're, really touched by what it is that you're doing, how can businesses and individuals work with Foster360, whether that be actually working with or volunteering with you, or what can you say to the community as far as what you could really use from them to help boost your organization and move that forward?
So a few things, not in order of priority, but speaking engagements, we want to raise awareness on the problem. A lot of people still don't know what is happening in their own backyards. They don't understand the implications of trauma. So speaking as much as we can. We are definitely looking for partners. I don't like the word donors. I don't want people who just, of course, we won't say no to anything, but really people who want to be a part of this solution, partners that come in and, help us grow this program and understand what it takes to grow this program. We are entering a lot of our volunteer opportunities on the Just Serve website. So I would invite anybody that is looking for volunteer opportunities to go on Just Serve and look for postings there for opportunities to be more hands-on. And we are under, Helen's Hope Chest and Mesa United Way. And as such, we do qualify for the foster care tax credit, which if you're an individual tax filer, you can get up to $500 a dollar-for-dollar tax credit and $1,000 for couples. And anything helps. A lot of our money goes in motel rooms. It goes in Lyft and Uber rides because we empower the youth with those rides to go to important appointments. Anything really, really helps us grow this program. So awareness, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
I believe that people need to understand what is going on and what is the solution.
Right.
And not just, I could give you all my numbers. We took 15 kids off the streets in a year and a half. But that's not what I want to show. I want to show that we are really making a difference the right way. As right as possible, given the circumstances. Is that making sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And we are truly making a difference. We received recently a few testimonials of our youth, and I think of the one we spent the past 3 weeks actually working on 2 cases that were really complex with homeless youth that we were really urgently looking to place somewhere. And this one youth, I met with him, and the way he said thank you to me, it just reminded me of my why. And I looked at him and I saw my son. He is somebody's son. And this young man has nobody in his life. His belongings fit in a backpack. And he doesn't know how to relate. He doesn't know how to really create that connection. We are there for him now. And we heard from another youth that now that he works with us, he knows he will never be homeless. And those are things that remind us constantly of why we're doing what we're doing.
Right. And Dr. Rhoton, as we wrap up here, what would you like for people to know if they're wanting to get more information about trauma-informed care or anything else about your organization? What would you like for them to know?
Well, we've done a couple of things. One of the things we've done to make this information really accessible, and we have actually more people outside the United States than in the United States, but we put most of our courses on Udemy and made them, they're like $15, $18, where if you were sitting in our classrooms, you'd be spending a couple of $100 for that same thing, because we just want to get the information out in people's hands. So we've done that. If they want to know about how to put this into an organization, then they can just call the office. We have materials we can show them, or we can have somebody talk to them about it. But the organizational piece, I think we're going to see more change in this arena over the next decade, because we have business schools saying you have to treat people differently than what we have traditionally treated them in order to maximize their productivity and align them along, business mission, and, have them be focused on outcomes rather than keeping them in environments that are so churning their system up all the time. That, managing through fear and demand is just not a good way to live. And they recognize that more and more.
Right.
So I think we're going to see outside of the field of mental health, we're going to see a shift towards all of this in the next decade. And I think it's about time. I still think most systems in government fall way behind, and opportunities to kind of tell people about it anytime they're willing to listen is, at least they don't get mad at me anymore for saying these things.
Well, thank you both so much. I always say at the beginning of the show, the people always say, gosh, how am I going to know what to say? Are we going to have enough to talk about? And then next thing you know, I'm like, well, and we're 60 minutes in. And this is one of those conversations that can continue to go on. And I really hope that it does. For anyone listening, all of the information from today's show, how to find both organizations on social and their website, all of those things will be posted in the show notes afterwards when this becomes a podcast. But thank you both so much for being here today and sharing your information. Such great organizations and great information to have out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to 3C Amplified, where we share how others are connecting, creating, and collaborating to amplify their impact, and we hope we've inspired you to do the same in your community. If you are a fellow change maker and want to build connections, create relationships, and collaborate with others to make positive change, join the online community built to support and engage people like you wanting to amplify their impact in communities around the world. Visit 3camplified.com/community to learn more. Until next time, I'm Jacqueline DeStremps with Another Hand Advantage. Let me help create a digital marketing strategy to put your organization's mission in front of your target audience and highlight the impact you're having in your community.